I am so excited to tell you guys about our Come Back to Christ event. That is March 29th at the beautiful Black Hill Event Center in St. George, Utah. We've been wanting to put this event together for a while just to create a space where you can connect with other people and learn how to kind of move forward as you have a faith crisis yourself, or as you have friends and family who are grappling with their faith. And so you can communicate with other people who have gone through this themselves and come out the other side stronger. We have guests that have been on the podcast like Dusty Smith, Austin and Tikla. Austin wrote the Light and Truth letter, which is a response to the CES letter. Julio, his episode was so good. And we're actually going to be doing a live podcast at the event with a really incredible story that I've been waiting for so long to record. So I am so excited about that. Initially, we were going to sell tickets to the event, and we ultimately just decided we didn't want to do that. So tickets are purely based on donation, whether you can donate $0 or $30. It doesn't matter. We want you to be there. We didn't know how we could put the event on without doing a ticketing model, just because we had to fly people out, pay for hotels and travel and lodging and food and all the things. And we've had the coolest thing happen since then. We've just had people reach out and want to be sponsors for our event. So a friend of my dad's reached out, and he is a huge fan of the podcast. He owns Mike's Auto Shack, and Mike is the most humble, genuine, cool guy, and he just wanted to support the podcast. And so he is actually sponsoring the lunch for everybody that's coming, which is so nice. And he actually goes and gets cars for people at the auction, and he just charges a fee. You can get any car you want, and it's a really good deal. I mean, it's honestly genius, and we're definitely going to Mike for our next car, but he is so kind and sponsored the lunch. So thank you so much, Mike. Tickets are going really fast. So you are going to want to get your ticket soon, because there is a very limited number of tickets. We hope in the future that we can have a bigger venue and we can accommodate more people, but we would love for you guys to be able to come and interact, and we'll have a panel so you'll be able to ask questions to the guests. It's just going to be a really amazing day. So we'd love to see you there. We're so excited.
Dan, I am so excited to have you on the podcast. So let's start off. Tell us a little bit about you, just like some background info, so we can have some context on who you are as we're listening to you tell your story.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm really excited to be able to be here, and I mean, this is just a surreal experience to be here with you. And I've loved the podcast for so long, and it's just a great platform, and I'm grateful for all you've done. So, but yeah, my name is Van Taylor. I'm 25 years old, and I just got home from my mission, serving in the Washington Everett mission with President Oaks, and just absolutely loved my time in the mission. And, definitely never was really sure that was going to be something that would happen in my life, but sure enough,
Wait, now tell us a little bit more about with President Oaks. Let's talk a little bit about that. What do you mean by you served with President Oaks?
So President Oaks, his name's Dan Oaks, and he was just wonderful. He changed my life, absolutely. He specializes in therapy outside of the mission, and he helps people with pornography and a lot of different things, and just a really inspired, just a good guy. And he's pretty well known in the therapy community, and so we were very, very blessed to have him as our mission president. And was just really inspired by his leadership and the way that he helped the missionaries work through all the difficulties of being a missionary and just getting prepared for life. And I mean, that man he shaped my life, and I'm always grateful for that. So yes, absolutely. Dan Oaks.
Well, awesome. Okay, well, let's jump into your story.
Well, I mean, it has been a journey. I mean, even being able to get out there on a mission, it was a lot to be able to get there, but I'm grateful to have been able to go. But the whole journey started when I was pretty young. I was about 11 years old. And it was about this time when pornography was introduced into my life, which was a big, big trial for a long time. And it just dominated parts of my life. And I would never say I was like an obsessive and a horrible addict, but it was definitely something that, as all porn addicts know, it really affects your life, negatively affects your life. And it was right before I became a deacon, and later was in a deacon's corps president, and had all these things. And my dad was serving in a church calling and leadership and things like that. And so a lot of the members and individuals just thought everything in my life was fine and dandy, and So it was really hard for me, and it cost me a lot at a young age. And so I like to be open and honest and just talk about everything. So I'll just, jump right into it. But it was about that time that I really, at this point in the church, there wasn't a lot of good resources for people to be able to talk about it. And of course, in the deacon's quorum and all around, everyone's like, oh, no, me, I would never struggle with that. And then, of course, you found out later, as you've probably heard, everyone was struggling with it. There could have even been leaders who were struggling with it, right? Who knows? But at the time, there wasn't a good way for us to be able to talk about it. And so I didn't know how to tell people that I was struggling with it or talk to my parents about it or anything. So that's when I started. About 12 is when I started struggling with self-harm. And that became a big problem for me for a lot of years. And I didn't know how to outwardly express what I was feeling inside and cry out for help. And so it was really difficult, and it was hard because I was kind of doing it in a way that no one really even knew what was happening, and I always wore long sleeves, and there's in parts that not a lot of people saw, right? And so that was a big struggle for a while, and then later on when my parents did find out what was kind of going on with the self-harm, it still didn't come up that I was struggling with pornography, and so it's continued to be a struggle for me.
Is there anything your parents could have done differently? Like, I know that looking back, like as we're progressing as a community and just the world in general is progressing about the things that we openly discuss, but is there anything your parents could have done that would have helped you feel like you could go to them and talk to them about it? I serve as a missionary in the LDS 12-step program, and it's in the pornography addiction group. Man, my heart is so softened for these young men that are struggling with this. And I know that women also struggle with it. I personally haven't had that, but I do know that it is something
Yeah.
that women struggle with as well. And it was pretty foreign to me until being a leader. And now I realize how prevalent it is.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I want to, as a parent, I want to be able to protect my children. And I'm wondering, like, from your perspective, did your parents ever talk to you about it? Did you feel like there was something that they could have done differently that would have made a difference for you? Or I just am curious to know your perspective on that.
Yeah, absolutely. First, I want to say that I do think my parents handled it very well in the best way that they could, especially at that time. It was very foreign to a lot of people. And so the thing is that what I was very worried about, and I think a lot of kids are worried about now, is like knowing where it comes from. I thought as a kid naturally that the one thing that I had to connect with my friends and to play games or things like that was my device, right? But that also was the one thing that was helping me to access all this horrible stuff, right? And so as a parent and as a kid, for me, it was hard because I was always feeling like if I were to open up about it, I would lose that connection from the world and from my friends, which I've learned later on in life that connection and having a community is a huge part of being able to combat pornography, right? And so I think it was just more that if my parents and I had established kind of a game plan, that's like, look, if something happens, like I always say now, if my son comes and tells me that he's struggling with pornography, the first place we're going is Dairy Queen, and I'm buying him a Blizzard, 100%. Like the fact that he came and talked to me about it, like that's great. And second of all, like there's no way and no chance I'm going to take away his device because you can't live without it in this day and age, and that's not the way to combat it. Learning how to combat it is learning how to handle those emotions, those feelings, and how to deal with sexual feelings in general. And so that was kind of where I think if we'd established a better base of what would be our game plan if that were to come up, and I would even argue nowadays when it comes up, because with every kid you should expect that, the age has even gone down. I think now it's like 8 to 11 is like the average age. And that's for boys, right? And
It's
it's,
heartbreaking to
right. It's
think about.
sad. It's I think for girls it's 11 to 13. I think boys it's like 85%. I talked to President Oaks about this because he knows all the numbers. And then with girls it's up in like the 40s or the high 30s. So it's definitely, nowadays it's becoming very normal. It's important that you're just prepared for when that happens and anticipate not if, but just, when that's going to be part of your life.
Right.
So,
Mm-hmm.
but it's definitely scary. So
To continue your story, I'm going to have a lot of questions for you. Listeners probably want to know, how can I navigate this with my
course.
kids, or maybe they're struggling with it themselves.
Absolutely. I'm an open book. I just want to help, So that was the base problem for me from when I was very young. And so later on in my story, everything else really, and I didn't realize this for a long time, tied back to that original problem that I developed from a young age, right? So fast forward in life goes on. I'm now about 16, and I started dating a girl. And growing up in the church, it's always like, oh, you can't date till you're 16. So I'm like, okay, finally, when I turn 16, I can have a girlfriend. But then I find out when I'm 16 that you're at this point, you weren't supposed to steady date when you turn 16. You're just allowed to go on dates. I'm like, well, I've been going on dates since I was in like 6th grade. I don't know what you're talking about. Like, I've been hanging out with girls. Like, I mean, this. Like, I want to have like a girlfriend. So I started dating someone, and I didn't really tell my parents about it. So they'd found out that I was with this girl and that we were pretty serious, and they were really worried about me spiritually. So I came home from seeing her one day. We'd been together for about 2 months. And I came home from seeing her, and they're like, okay, like, look, we found out about this girl. We're really worried about you spiritually. So you're moving to Utah and you leave tomorrow. Cause I'm from Colorado, and that's where we were living. So they're like, you leave tomorrow. And I was like, oh my gosh. And so in my mind, I already had my game plan. Like immediately it was like a switch went off. But I told them, I'm like, okay, I feel like I just want to kind of think about this and try and process it a little bit. So I went back to my room and I grabbed $14 and a Craftsman knife. And then I put it in my pocket and I went to the front room. I'm like, look, I really appreciate you guys' concern and everything, but I just booked it out the front door. And I did. So then I ran out the front door. I run down the street. I hide in some bushes, and I was kind of anticipating, of course, that they're going to come after me, right? And so I was hiding in this tree, and I saw my mom kind of come in the van, and she drove around the corner, and I thought my dad was with her. So I left the bushes. What I didn't anticipate is my dad was then following behind her on a mountain bike. I'm like, oh gosh, here we go. So I go through like the Denny's parking lot over some sprinklers and rocks and stuff. My dad's behind me on this bike, and I go inside of a McDonald's, of course, where all scared kids would go, right? Go inside of McDonald's, and I run inside. So my dad drops the bike, and then he comes inside to come and grab me, and he's at this table, and I kind of like hop over this table, and I run outside, and now I've got the bike, and he's on foot. So I keep going, right? I'm riding my bike down the road, and this scene is just like, it's just kind of, now I look back at it and it's kind of comedic, right? At the time it was very like, it was a big deal.
Yeah.
But so, I'm riding my bike down the road. My mom is in a van, like honking, and she's driving down the road. My dad's running after me, and there's this guy, and he's driving on the road. He rolls down the window. He looks over at me. He goes, hey, what'd you do? And I was like, they're trying to send me to Utah with a bunch of Mormons. He's like, keep going. And so, but I keep going. I got the bike, and in my mind, I'm like, okay, I just gotta get away out of town for enough time that I can like call my parents and be like, look, I've been gone for a while. Like, I don't want to come home until you guys are gonna like reconsider what we were gonna do, right? So that was my plan. So I wind up going to like a tire shop and asking for a ride from some random guy who ended up knowing my dad because he was serving as a stake president. And so this guy's like, oh, is your dad Nick Taylor? I'm like, gosh. So then I just left. And then later I'm riding past that same tire shop, and there's a bunch of cops there. So now I'm aware that the cops are fully involved, and this is turning into like a big deal. And so I'm riding my bike to my best friend's house, and I'm like, okay, if it comes down to it, I'm not going to run from the cops. Like, I'm running from the cops, but like, if they're like chasing me, I'm not going to like throw my life away, right? So there's one point, I'm riding my bike up this hill, and at the stop sign, there's a sheriff stopped at a stop sign going this way, and I'm riding this way. And then there's an ambulance coming towards me. So I saw this ambulance coming. I dove off the bike into some bushes, and I see the lights turn on in the ambulance. And I'm like, oh gosh, it's game over. This is it, it's over. And they come over and they get out and they're like, hey, you all right, little buddy? And I was like, oh, I just fell off my bike. Like, I'm good. Like, you sure? I'm like, yeah, no, it's really fine. They're like, okay, have a nice day. I was like, whew. All right, we keep going. So I hop back on the bike. Well, I wind up actually stealing my best friend's brother's car. And so I dropped the bike at his house. I took the car. They didn't even realize at the time that I'd taken the car. And so I left, and I'm ironically driving to Utah. And so the first night I'm in Salina, where they have those big Diet Coke and the giant Sprite and all that stuff. So I park there, and I ask a couple people for some money. I get a little bit of money together. I go to bed. The next morning, I sold some golf clubs in the trunk of the car, got some more money, and I'm planning on driving, ironically, to good old St. George. Because I had an aunt who had a vacation home there, and I knew where the spare key was. So my plan was to go there and hang tight for a couple days, and then call my parents and be like, look, I'm totally fine, but like, I'm not coming home until you change your mind. So there's a whole lot of things that happen in between now and then, but I'll just fast forward. I drive. I get to St. George. At one point, I don't have my phone. I don't have any maps. I've never been to St. George more than the like 2 or 3 times that I went there to my aunt's vacation home. I also, like, I look rough. Like, I do not look like I'm having a good time. Like, I'm wearing an old person's nightgown that I stole from a senior center. My jeans are cut off. Like, I cut my leg at one point. And so, anyways, I go to this gas station, and this guy just looks at me like, and he just knows, like, I'm going through it. I, like, walk over to an atlas, and I'm looking at the atlas, and I look at a page, and I look at him, and he looks at me, and he gives me a nod, and then I just rip the page out of the book, like, closed it, put it on the shelf, and left, and he didn't even say a single word. No words exchanged. I, like, just hope somehow I meet this guy someday. But, so, anyways, I get an atlas. I wind up in St. George. It's a miracle I can even find her house. I've only been there like 2 or 3 times. And I show up, I find the spare key, I open up the door, I pull the car into the garage, and then I take the key that got me into the garage, and I go to put it in the house, and it doesn't work. And it turns out the spare key was just to get into the garage. And there's a different key in the front of the house, and I'm like, oh gosh. It's also in the middle of July. And I'm like, I'm going to die. And there's no AC in the car that I stole. So I'm like, this is it. Like, I'm going to die right here. This is the end. Walk out the garage, and I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do. There's a lawnmower with some gas. I'm like, okay, I can mow some lawns, get a little money together. And then I walk out in the front yard, and I look down, and in the front yard of her house, there's a faded $50 bill just chilling in the grass. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, God's telling me I got to keep going. Like, this is not the end. So then I'm like, all right, well, we keep going. So I filled up the car with gas, and then I decided to go to Arizona, where I have a friend who just graduated from high school, and I stop in Flagstaff. I snuck into a hotel, made a fake Facebook account, reached out to him to find out where he was living. And then I also tried pulling money from my bank card. I tried my bank card. It doesn't work. So now I've only got a few dollars left, and I drive to Phoenix. I get there, and I'm still waiting on him to respond. And so this is the morning of what would now be the 3rd day, because it's pretty early now. It's like I was driving all night. So, and I have no money left. My friend's not responding. I haven't really slept.
Like, are you 100% sober?
I've never drank alcohol, never smoked any weed or anything, nothing. So it was just the girl. It was just for the girl. So I pull up, and I have like a few quarters left, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to call my mom. I start 6-7. I call my mom. I'm like, all right, Mom, look, I am not in a state that is touching Colorado. And they thought I never left Montrose, my hometown in Colorado. And so I called her, and she's like, oh my gosh. And I'm like, I'm not coming home till we reconsider things. She's like, yes, absolutely. We'll figure something out. Like, just tell us where you're at, and we'll get you home. So fast forward, they get me home. I get back home, and the family that I'd stolen the car from was like, obviously they didn't want to press charges because they were my friends. But they wanted me to learn, and they wanted me to be able to get help, right? And so they told my parents, like, look, we won't press any charges if you can find a way to help him, or just like get him to go somewhere to get some help. So my parents hop online, and they're like, okay, you know what? The next step we need to take is we got to send him to a wilderness camp. So good old Anasazi.
Love. I don't know if I told you this, but first of all, I went to an adolescent facility when I was 16 for
Nice.
15 months. And also my work right now is I work in the behavioral health space with wilderness programs all the time. And so
Wow.
wilderness programs, very near and dear to my heart. As somebody who went to a teen program, I actually am a huge advocate for when kids are wild and crazy, like, what else are you supposed to do as a parent? And so a lot of people do not like adolescent programs, but I feel like my parents they saved my life by sending me there.
Well, I think it was good. It was definitely the best move that we had at the time, and it was still a good thing for me. I wish I could say that it was like the key, and for a lot of people it is, right? So I won't say that they're bad, and it was still really good, right? I enjoyed the experience and everything, but yeah, I came to the wilderness camp, and well, first of all, they didn't really know what it was. They told me, like, yeah, there's going to be like archery and horseback riding. You're going to stay in a cabin. Like, it's going to be awesome. I'm like, okay, like, yeah, that sounds all right. Because the website didn't really say much about it. So I come, and the first day we drove like 6 hours to the middle of the Tonto National Forest. And then they hand us a pack with like boots, 2 tarps, pack string, a cup, a bag of rice, bag of lentils, 1 roll of toilet paper, hand sanitizer, like not much. And then they like kind of kick us out the van with these 2 people. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, where's the cabin? Like, where's the horseback riding? So I find out very quickly that that was very much not the case, right? We were hiking every day. We had to pack our own pack with pack string. We were living off partially from the land and also from stuff in our pack. And you had to earn the right to do a lot of different things. So that was, the wilderness camp. And there's, oh gosh, so many things happened at the wilderness camp, right? A lot of stories. But I completed it, and they told me before I left, they said, if you complete the wilderness camp and you come home and you agree, then like we will kind of back off a little bit. We'll give you a little bit of space. So I'm like, okay, this sounds all right. I just got to go to this camp, crank it out real quick. I'll go home. And so I came home from the camp, and the girl, as she's still there, and we start dating again. And so we're together for about a year and a half. And it was a high school relationship. It was still had its ups and downs, right? But after we've been together for about a year and a half, she cheated on me, which was really hard, super difficult. And then I decided, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna forgive her. Let's work on it. And then happened again. And then I'm like, okay, this is too much, and we broke up. And that was kind of when things got really tough, emotionally and stuff. And so it was about this time, a little bit earlier, but about this time when I started drinking and started smoking. And it really just kind of pushed me down that rabbit hole, right? So then shortly after I kind of started drinking and things, my parents went out of town. I had to work Black Friday, and so they left for Thanksgiving. And a girl asked me if she can have a little get together at my house for her birthday. And I'm like, okay, I had something the night before that wasn't anything crazy, like 10, 15 people, nothing crazy. She's like, yeah, I'll only invite a couple people, no big deal. Well, you probably can see where this is going. There's like 150 kids at our house, and this whole huge house party happened. There was a lot of alcohol, a lot of drugs, very not good. Just your classic, just a bad story, right? And so my parents were obviously very upset, rightfully, completely. That was my fault. It was not a good situation. Because they're gone, the cops are like, hey, we can't really leave you here as an underage teenager with all this alcohol. So like, we gotta arrest you and take you in. But it's just for the night. Like, you're just going to be there for the night. Your parents are coming. They'll come pick you up in the morning. And I'm like, okay. So throw me in the back of the cop car, get arrested, go to the juvenile detention center. And I'm there for the night. And my parents get home. And at this point, I think rightfully they get home and they're just like, they have no idea what to do now. Like, what to do with me, what to do in general. I'm about 17. Yeah. So, because when I stole the car, that was when I was 16. I had my license. I got it in January, and that happened in July. So they just have kind of not really any idea what to do. So they just decided to pay for me to stay in this juvenile detention center while they figure out what's going on, right? And
It's
so
their mom, if I'm being
I
honest.
know, yeah, 100%. No judgment. Don't blame them. Like, I was a tough kid, So that was another experience. Definitely would say the wilderness camp was a more positive one. The juvie was definitely not as good of an experience, I would say.
Well, I'm just gonna say, like, man, I didn't know anybody could level up to my level as a naughty teenager, but hey, you're
So I'm glad we can relate on that.
we can relate on that for sure.
Well, and it's funny because, I talked in my homecoming talk, I talked a little bit about your story and being on the arrest page and then being at church the next week, right? And I was like, oh my gosh, because like, it's a small hometown and they have Montrose message board and the police department page. So when I ran away and stole the car, that got shared everywhere and it's all over the pages, and like, it's this whole thing, right? It blew up and all these things. And so we'll talk a little bit more about coming back later and what that was like, but I was definitely super blessed for the people that were around me, and of course. So, but yeah, so I was in this juvenile detention center. They decided to help me kind of stay there while I finished that semester of high school. And so I finished that semester, and then I leave, and they're like, okay, you're going to Utah. Like, we're just sending you to Utah.
Where were they sending you?
Actually, right over there, right behind this bookcase. So this is my grandma's house.
Oh, okay.
So in Lehigh, yeah. So I was going to live here with her, and she's super loving, and she took me in, and that was really, a very important time in my life. And it was right before Christmas, and like, obviously my parents and we weren't really on good talking terms, and, it wasn't like I got any Xboxes that year. So, it was tough for me, tough for them, but my grandma took me in, and she loved me and was super supportive. And she kind of was just like patient while I was trying to figure things out. And, I wish I could say that was like when things got sorted out, but I was an alcoholic and a drug addict for about 6 years. And then I was in Louisiana for sales for a little bit, made some money, came back. And that's when things really started to get more serious.
Can we pause for a second and
Yeah.
talk
Yeah.
about the angels in our lives that
Yeah.
I had a really similar experience with my Aunt Dana. I know she listens to the podcast. I don't know if she listens
Yeah.
to every episode, but
Yeah.
her name's Dana Egbert, and she let me live with her when I was on drugs. And her I don't know if she actually knew that I was like full on drugs, but like she knew I was messed up for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Her letting me live with her and her unconditional love for me, I still had to like fall flat on my face after that.
Right.
That opened a piece of my heart that I don't think I would be where I am today if it wasn't for her. And when I hear you talking about your grandma and how she let you live with her and she opened her home to you, like most people wouldn't do that. Most
Yeah.
people would be like, hey, I'm going to let this wild and crazy kid come live with me. But there
Yeah.
are angels in this world, in our lives, that they make all the difference. And even though we had to go the other direction, it's like
Yeah.
those angels still, they made such a difference. I love your grandma so much. I don't know her. I have no idea who she is, but I love her so much because I can see how Heavenly Father softened her heart to be an angel in your life, just like my Aunt Dana was in my
Yeah.
life and other people along the way in my story. So
No, you're absolutely right. And she is nothing but that, just an angel, and that she played a pivotal role in me being able to get things figured out. And it's those people that we have, whether we're members or police side presidents or grandmas or sisters or brothers, those people that are willing to be patient and watch as people
and
figure
take a
things out.
chance. Like
Yeah, exactly.
it I had a bishop one time that he told me I could live with him when he was the singles ward bishop and I was like, I had nowhere to go. And he's like, if you need to stay at our house, you can. And he's got a bunch of kids and,
Yeah.
and I have never forgotten that because it was
Yeah.
such an act of kindness and selflessness when I was
Yeah.
going through all my crap. So for anybody listening to this that feels inclined to like be kind to somebody that's going through it. Like, you never know if you are going to be the person that completely changes the trajectory of somebody's life. One more shout out to the Cutchin family who let me live with them when I was turning myself into the jail in Arizona. They had no reason to be letting me live with them.
Yeah.
No reason. But they were
Yeah.
angels in my life. I hear that in your story. It's so important for people to know that you never know what kind of role you're going to play in somebody's life to change
Yeah.
their entire trajectory.
Absolutely. Yeah, you nailed it right on the head. And I'm just so grateful for that. Grateful for my grandma. Linda Jeffries is her name. She's an angel. So I'm living here with her, and I'm, like I said, I moved to Louisiana, and then when I came back, I was living in an apartment complex where I found out later the reason why it's so cheap to live there is because one of your roommates will be a juvenile who got a scholarship to be reincorporated back into society and go to school at UVU. And I'm like, oh, perfect. This is just wonderful. And so it was at this time that, I got pretty heavily involved a lot more with different drugs, started trying different psychedelics and more harder drugs and pills and things. And me and a couple of other people, we got involved in Xanax. And that's kind of was our thing now in Utah. And it was really big at that time. That was when things kind of started to get more serious. We had a couple of gun scares, a couple of robbing scares, a couple of just different experiences like that. And so it was definitely when things were getting more serious, and I could see like, okay, my life's definitely taken a different turn here. And so it was about this time that I'd actually tried coming back to church because I had an acid trip where I decided like, okay, you know what, like I got to get my life figured out. And so a piece of this that I'll add, this is a little bit more of maybe a little trigger warning, I guess, for some people, but there was one point that when things were getting more serious with the Xanax, I traded some drugs so that I could get a gun and try and feel more safe. And then later on, while I was on this acid, I had decided this day, and I'd had this experience in times past, but it wasn't like this, of this nature and to this aspect. But I decided that, my quickest way to be able to overcome these things and to move on would be to take my own life. And so while I was under the influence of these drugs, I mean, I had my gun, it was loaded, and everything was ready to go. And, growing up my whole life, my dad used to always say that I get distracted really easily and I would see something shiny. And if I see something shiny, I'm like, oh my gosh, something shiny. And I look over at it, right? And my dad would always make that joke. And so while I'm having this experience and I'm really genuinely just preparing to make this very, very grave decision, I saw something shiny, of course. And I heard my dad say, hey, look, something shiny. And it was just like a shining, like a blue feather. My eyes were closed and I just saw this like blue feather. I only bring that up because it was like this little tiny piece of something that was very personal to me that was just enough to keep me from making this really big decision, right? And so, I got rid of all my stuff. I was listening to the Tabernacle Choir in the shower the next morning. All my roommates are like, oh my gosh, what happened? I was always one who's like, I got to drink the most, I got to smoke the most, I got to take the most pills. Like, I was like doing the most and always, always, always high, always drunk. Like, that was just me. That was my vibe. Right. And so when the next morning they're like, what's going on? I'm like, guys, I'm going to change my life and I'm moving out of here. I had that similar experience, maybe not to the degree of thinking about taking my life, but I had that similar experience about 3 or 4 times, like 3.5, I would say, times where of course, because it was motivated by drugs, in Alma 32, we learn about a good seed and bad seed. And I would describe having those spiritual experiences as a bad seed, right? Because I was under the influence of heavy drugs. And although there were a couple of good things that came out of it, in the end, like it says in Alma 32, the seed withered away and it was in barren ground and it didn't last, right? And so I always felt like that chapter was talking about those experiences where I didn't really know how to describe them or what department to put those experiences into. And so fast forward, I come back, I fall back in, I come back, I fall back in. And so a lot of people at this point are kind of just like, what are you doing? Like, you're not coming back. Like, it's not going to happen, and there's a lot of people that, that are kind of having those thoughts, but there's also on the flip side, a lot of people that just were patient and waiting and excited for the day that it would finally stick, So fast forward now, I'm about 22 and I was at a point in my life when I hadn't gone a day without drinking or smoking in about 3 years, maybe a little less than 3 years. But I just got my wisdom teeth out, and just by happenstance this day, I hadn't drank, I hadn't smoked or done anything. And so I just went to bed and I fell into this like very strange dream state where like I was asleep, but I was very much like awake. And it was the strangest dream. I've never had anything like that before. And I was experiencing, it was extremely real. And so I fall asleep and I see myself, and I have 3 daughters, I'm married, and my kids and my wife and all of us are just super unhappy. And my life is just not in a good place. And I can tell that my wife's unhappy, I was unhappy, I was still an alcoholic, I was still struggling with all these things. And then things kind of moved and progressed in the dream, and a lot of things happened, and I wound up in a courtroom, and I'm in the courtroom, and I'm just there begging for more time. And I was just begging the judge if I could just have more time to figure things out. And I was granted that time, right? And then I woke up. And on a normal day, at this point, every morning, how my normal routine is that I would wake up. I couldn't eat if I hadn't smoked first. And so I had to smoke. But every time in the morning when I would smoke, it would make me throw up, and I'd throw up blood, and it was like really bad. And that was like every day for months on end. I went to doctors to try and figure it out. And they're all telling me the same thing, it's your addictions. That's what you got to figure out, right? But so every day I'd wake up about, 10 or 11, I'd smoke, I'd throw up, I'd go back to sleep for a little bit, and then I'd wake up, and then I would eat. And the only reason why I wanted to eat is because if I didn't eat before I would drink, I would throw up the alcohol, right? So that was the day. That was the daily process. And so on this particular day, I woke up and I was drenched in sweat. I was exhausted, and it's like, just go back to bed. Like, just go back to bed, fall asleep again. Like, that's what you normally do. You'll figure this out later. And I just spiritually felt like I only just needed to stay awake. The only one good decision I had to make was just not go back to bed. Like, that was it at this point. And I was like, okay. And I laid down for a second, and I'm laying there with my head on my pillow, and I'm like, you know what? I'm done. No, I'm not doing this. And I got up, and I'm like, okay, how do I stay awake? So I like jump in the shower, and I take a cold shower, and I'm washing myself and everything, and I get up. I'm like, okay, I just gotta like stay busy. And so I start cleaning my room and things, and I'm like, okay, you know what? Like, I think I need to quit drinking. I think I need to quit drinking alcohol. And I was really worried because at this point I was living with my sister. We'd got an apartment together and had also left the church at this point. I'd left the church, and then a little while later, she had kind of decided she was going to leave the church, and we kind of did it like together, and we were best friends. Like, and to this day, she's still one of my best friends. I was really worried that when I decided to quit drinking, she was going to feel like I drug her away from the church and then kind of hung her out to dry. And so I'm worried about telling her that I want to quit drinking, and I'm worried how she's going to react and what she's going to say and things. I walk out, and she's sitting on the couch with her boyfriend at the time. And I'm like, hey, Sid, like, I think I want to quit drinking. Her name's Sydney. I'm like, I think I want to quit drinking. And she looks back at me and she's like, okay, like, how can I help? And I was like, oh my gosh, like, that's amazing. And, she's not active in church, right? But she's like, totally, like, I want to support you. And what I got to see is that our relationship from that point forward had started to really flourish even deeper than it had before, because it wasn't based on that drinking or the smoking or having left the church together. So it got even stronger, right? And so that was kind of the initial first step. Now, that weekend, I was faced with a decision. And normally with most of my drinking, I did it alone in my bedroom by myself. And sometimes I'd be like on video calls with people or whatever, but I was mainly just at my apartment when I would drink. And so I had the option that first weekend to either go to a bar with my sister, my friend, and a bunch of her friends, or I could stay at home where there's tons of alcohol and where I would normally do most of my drinking. And I'm like, okay, both not great options, right? But I'm like, okay, let me think. I feel like I should go to the bar. And so I decided I'm going to go to the bar. And I had never, in all my 6 years of drinking, never had anything even remotely similar to this happen in all the years of drinking. But I come to the bar, we show up, and we walk inside, and this lady, she has a little tray. She just walks over to us. It's like as soon as we walked in with our group, there's a bunch of people there. She walks directly to our group, and without even really saying anything, she just starts putting shots in everyone's hands. And I was like, what is going on? I'm like, I never got a drop of free alcohol before, and now she's just putting alcohol in her hands. I'm like, what is going on? And she's like, oh yeah, we've got a promotion going on this weekend where everyone gets to try this free shot. And I'm like, what in the world? And I'm like, wait, this is Satan. This is the adversary right now. He's trying to get me to fall. This is an attack on me right now. So I look at her and she looks at me, and it was like a moment from a movie. She looks at me and she goes to hand it to me and looks to see if I'm going to take it. And I look at her and I just shook my head. And my sister also, although she wanted to support me, she was kind of going to see what I was going to do. And so I didn't take it, right? I didn't take the shot. And everyone drinks and I'm like, holy cow, I think I'm actually doing something. I think I'm making some moves now. And so everyone gets drunk. I drive everybody home and I get back and I'm like, dang, I feel kind of good. This is nice. I feel like I did something. So that was kind of the first test. And a little while later, I had a similar experience at a Formula One race with my dad and my grandpa, when as soon as I was by myself, I found an unopened six-pack of Heinekens just there at this Formula One race, which at a Formula One race, beer is it's super expensive, right? And so I'm like, what the heck is going on? This is insane. But I didn't drink it, right? And then a same thing later that weekend, I had more of those kind of tests. So that was kind of the initial part of starting to come back. And, I had some spiritual experiences. I had some times when I'd gone back to church and had some experiences and things. And before I'd even really told my parents anything, I didn't really tell them much in the beginning. They didn't know I was sober. They didn't know I was going to church because they'd seen me make those things before, and obviously it didn't work out. So I didn't want to tell them until I was ready. And I was like, okay, you know what? I think this is actually happening, Initially, actually, I started going to other churches out of pride. I'm like, ain't no way I'm going back to the Mormon church. No shot. I'm not giving my parents that satisfaction. No way. And so I go to these other churches. I'm going to Catholic church and Baptist church and Seventh-day Adventist and all these different churches and things. And I'm trying to find a bunch of answers to spiritual questions that I knew the answers if I was going from what I was taught growing up. But I was like, no, what do these people have to say about things? So I'm searching for all these answers and things. And I just was getting really frustrated because I was getting all sorts of different answers from different churches, from all these different sects of Christianity. And it was just very frustrating. And so I'm talking to a different sister, JC, who is a returned missionary, and I'm talking to her about all these things, and she's like, well, have you thought about, maybe reading the Book of Mormon? And I was like, I knew you were going to say it, right? I'm like, I knew you were going to say that. But I'm like, okay, you know what? Okay, whatever, I'll read the Book of Mormon. So from that day, I decided I was going to start reading the Book of Mormon every day. Kind of similar, just exactly like what you said, right? When you found the bookmark and you decide, you know what, I'm going to read this book every day. It's the exact same thing. It's you can be on heroin, you can be on alcohol, you can be on drugs, you can do anything. And it's you just pick up this book, this book right here, these pages, and you read it every day and you study it, and somehow your addictions just fall away, right?
You're immunized against the evils of the day.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the testimony that I started to gain from the Book of Mormon, because I'd had experiences where I'd tried overcoming the alcohol and the drugs and everything before, but I wasn't reading the Book of Mormon every day. And then I started, and it was like I didn't even feel tempted. I was like, no, I'm fine. I don't even want to. And so that was kind of the alcohol and the drugs. Now, the thing that had happened previously, when I had sobered up for a little while and I quit drinking, quit smoking, the thing that I'd never gotten sorted out before was the pornography. And that's what was really the base root problem. Even I would say from when I ran away and I stole the car and I, was in juvie or was drinking and smoking, the core problem and the biggest sign of this for sure was the self-harm, was that those problems were kind of the after effects of having had a pornography addiction. And so at this time, my sister's like, hey, also, have you ever heard of this app called Fortify? And I was like, no. And she's like, well, her husband's dad was working for the church and they were talking about doing like a collaboration between the church and this app called Fortify. She's like, you should check it out. So I'm like, okay. And I believe that it was a combination of using Fortify along with reading the Book of Mormon every day that I downloaded that app. And since that day, I've used it, well, not on my mission, but I'd used it every day, never missed. And I never went out of my way, never looked up pornography. And like, I had some hard days and things like that. But all I did was download the app, do the things that they told me to do, and read the Book of Mormon every day. And it was like this lifelong addiction that felt like I'd been carrying with me for years, was just like gone, just like that.
Tell us more about the app. Like, what does the app consist of?
Of course. So I think a couple of the really effective tools that they have in Fortify, one is they have a daily tracker that you use. They call it the battle tracker. And they do a really good job of making sure that you're using the app in a way that will define you and your addiction as two separate things, that you are not defined by your addiction, that you are just fighting with like a disease, that you're a victim of this plague, right? And so they do a really, really good job in the beginning. They have these really effective videos that have this cool little character guy, and they show him like separating himself from this addiction, and they invite you in the beginning to like really think about who you were before this came and what you enjoyed doing and what were some of your hobbies, what were you like. And so they really kind of put that in your mind. And then the battle tracker is where they have every day, they're like, okay, you have a victory or you have a setback. That's the day, okay? You either moved a little bit forward or a little bit backwards, but you need to look at the big picture. And so rather than focusing on, oh, I haven't looked at pornography or masturbated in a week or 2 weeks or a month or however long it's been, they're like, okay, how many days have you gone without it? And how many days have you slipped up and had a setback? And so they really focus on that principle, which really changes your whole mind, because you're like looking at it and you're like, wait a minute, I'm actually doing pretty good. I've only had a few days. Like, of course, for me, and I've got a few years to make up for, but since I started using this app, like, I'm doing pretty good. And so that's a big part of the app, is in the battle tracker. They track your emotions. They talk about, where you were, if you slipped up, what time of day it happened, what location, things like that. They talk about emotions, positive emotions, negative emotions, and they track everything. And then using AI, they help you kind of be aware of some signs of when you're more likely to have a victory, what helps you have a victory, or also what helps you have like a setback. So in the basic app of Fortify, they call them indicators or something like that, that you get like 3, the basic ones. And then in premium, you get a bunch more of just things where it's like, okay, you are 65% more likely to have a victory if you worked out at this time of day. But then it's like you are 80% more likely to have a setback if you have poor human connection combined with bad nutritional wellness or something like that.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
I can't wait to tell my group people about this.
You've got to tell them about it. It is a life changer. And something that it really is based on the effort you put in. It's not like you download the app and it does it on its own, right? For me, it was that every night without fail, I hopped on the app. I did a little tutorial thing if they had one for me to do that day. And then I filled out my journal and my battle tracker. It took me 5-10 minutes. And then on top of that, the cool part is that because I downloaded this from the very beginning, I had a journal from which later on my dad got to read all of it, and he just loved getting to see the journey from like the very beginning when I first started to try and get things figured out up until I later on ended up getting my patriarchal blessing and deciding to go on a mission and things like that, And then even when I was serving as a missionary, I had recreated the battle tracker on a Google Docs, and I would never miss a day on my mission. I never missed a day writing it down. And it was the coolest thing because now on my mission, I have the tracker, but I have my journal entry and the pictures from what happened that day and the emotions I was feeling. And it was a life changer, and that was all thanks to Fortify. That's what I'm studying. I want to be able to go back and work for them and join the fight because I love what they're doing. And I think they're doing an excellent job, and it's just a great company.
That is so cool. I love it.
That was Fortify. And so being able to really get a hold of my pornography addiction is what opened the door for me to actually start having spiritual experiences. Something that I think a lot of people, unless you're an addict, it's hard to understand, is that like a lot of approaches that companies would use to help people stop using stop using pornography. They'd be like, look, do you know how horrible the industry is? Did you know that like most porn stars are trafficked? Or did you know that they're treated horribly, or all these things? And what they don't understand is like most guys are fully aware and feel horrible about how bad the industry is, right? It's horrible.
The shame, it just makes you more shameful, which in turn keeps you stuck.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. You nailed it right on the head, right? And so that principle of learning that the shame, A, it doesn't help, and B, most guys are aware of that. And that's something that I think a lot of people don't really take into account is that pornography is horrible on your mental. Like you feel so bad about yourself. And most of the time, it's good men with good hearts, good young boys who like throwing rocks and playing in mud and riding their bike and doing these things that all of a sudden were attacked with this thing that just rewired their brain and just exploded with dopamine that they have like no idea to, how to react. And so that's really interesting. They compare the levels of dopamine that get released from pornography as it's the same level as cocaine. Okay. And so a lot of people compare pornography with cocaine, but truly that's not a just comparison because A, cocaine is very dangerous to do. A lot of people overdose on cocaine. It's hard to get. You can get robbed. You can get shot. It's very expensive and it's super detrimental on your body. And so there's a lot of negative things that come with even deciding to do cocaine. But with pornography, you could be an 11-year-old boy who saw pornography one time, and then a week later, you can be alone in the middle of the wilderness with no device, no nothing, and you can close your eyes and boom, you can take a hit of that drug just like that. It's literally behind your eyelids all the time, right? And so these poor boys, these poor, sad boys that I feel so much love for, are just victims of a society where pornography is being normalized, and they don't see that it's literally a horrible drug that just destroys your brain. For me, at this point in my life, when I finally started getting it figured out, I was able to have spiritual experiences and started feeling the Spirit and recognizing the Spirit. And so I start going to church. I start doing these things, and my bishop and my family, they're all really excited, and they're like, well, let's move on. You should get your patriarchal blessing. I was like, okay, I didn't really think it was that big of a deal. I'm like, okay, let me give my patriarchal blessing. And I've been faced with two big decisions at this point, kind of a serious relationship or school. And so those were kind of the big choices that I was faced with when I got my patriarchal blessing. To be honest, a mission was not even on my mind, in the slightest, right? But I go and I got my patriarchal blessing, and it was pretty clear that what would be next for me would be to go on a mission. And so, I finished getting my patriarchal blessing, and my sister was there, JC, she's there, and she kind of pauses for a moment, and she's like, so, what do you think? And I was honestly bummed. I'm not even going to lie. I'm not going to cap 100%. I was bummed, and I was like, I think I need to go on a mission. I was finally getting life figured out. I had just gotten a good job. I'm making good money, and life is finally starting to get sorted out. And then God's like, okay, put it all on hold for 2 years. And I was like, oh, I do not want to do this, right? But I decided, I go through my papers, and it was a big process to even be able to get my papers in. It was 6 months from the day I started doing my papers to when I had actually got my mission call and then was getting ready to go. So it was a long process, but the timing of everything was absolutely divine, and I saw so many miracles on my mission where I knew I was there exactly when I needed to be on my mission at that exact time, and the transfers lined up perfectly. And so that was the journey of just getting my patriarchal blessing and then deciding to go on my mission. And I could talk about my mission. I could do a whole 2-hour-long podcast just talking about that, as I'm sure everyone could. For me, the thing that really stuck out in the whole journey, kind of like we talked about earlier, is those angels and just the feeling in my heart that truly there are people on this earth who saw you on the arrest page, or saw me on the police department page, or saw my Instagram or my Facebook. At one point, I even posted a rap against the church, the whole thing. And even better is my dad posted a response to the rap, which is...
Oh my gosh.
So, that was I was very open about having left the church in these things. And so there were so many people that saw and knew that very vocally I was gone. I was out there. I even had some coworkers recently from Best Buy who I saw at my homecoming, and they're like, look, man, you are the last person I ever thought would go on a mission. No shot. And, and we went. And so there's those people that have those thoughts, but at the same time, there's tons of members, and there's all of us as members who could do better in the department of seeing those things and just thinking in our minds and choosing not to judge way beforehand, thinking, you know what, oh, I just can't wait till they come back. I cannot wait. Oh, I hope I get to pass the sacrament to them the first time they come back to church. Because at the end of the day, none of us know the fight that someone has gone through before they walk through those doors and they sit down on those pews and they take that bread and they take that water, right?
That is
You
so
know,
true. Oh, that just hit me right in the feels. So true. Man, I'm just thinking about, man, we've been on a roller coaster ride with this story today. Like from stealing the car and jumping on the bike to going on a mission, and here we are. That is so spot on. It's like you just never know what somebody has gone through to be able to go sit in church that day, like what their experience has been
yeah,
like. And when you were just talking about how you went and got your patriarchal blessing and things were just falling into place, you're starting to make this progress. The spirit just hit me so strong because I have felt that where I just like took that step forward, and it's like the spirit just floods your life and it's so beautiful. And to like hear you sharing that, it's like it's so amazing to just see how God, if you just turn to him, he
yeah,
embraces you with open arms.
yeah, absolutely. And that, I mean, being able to see that take place and just unfold in my life, I mean, I pray about it every night. I am just absolutely baffled and blown away at the things that God is able to do, having to be able to even have the opportunity to go out there and serve a mission, and then being on the mission, being like, okay, well, I'm going to get home. I'm about to be 26. I have a pass and all these things, and like being worried about getting married. And then, to come home and, I've met one of the most amazing people in my whole life. And I'm really excited to see where things go. And I'm excited about to see some of the other blessings that the Lord has planned. And it's like being able to see all these things unfold. It's like I had an experience the other day. I'm in the car and I'm like seeing these things that I feel like are kind of happening. Like I was just like feeling the spirit out of nowhere. And all of a sudden I just like saw kind of like what I felt like was a little bit of the future. And I was like, are you trying to say gonna happen? And I just like was just flooded with emotions and start crying and all these things of just being like, this is what he does. This is like God's specialty. He's the greatest gift giver who knows exactly what you want and knows exactly how you want it to happen. And for it to happen, we got to do a couple things, but to be able to see what he can do with the little bit that we can bring to the table is just astounding. And, the experiences that have come from that, being able to even be on this podcast, on top of that, like all these things that happen, I'm like, oh my gosh, like you are blessing me in ways I didn't even think were possible. And that's the beauty, right, of the gospel. This has been on my mind a ton lately, is like, we talked a little bit about how you don't know the fight that someone has gone through before they walk through those doors. And I would add to that on your behalf and on mine that like we also don't know the hours and hours that people have spent on their knees just praying for that moment, for that special time when that person, that brother, that sister, that maybe a mother or father or son or daughter or cousin, that moment that they've just been praying and praying and praying, that someday they will just walk through those doors. And so as members, we have this beautiful opportunity to choose way before they even get to those handles on those doors and they see the welcome sign right at the front of the church building, way before that day even comes, that we get to choose that we're not going to judge them and that we are going to be those people that say things like, I cannot wait till they get to walk through those doors again. I'm going to sit right next to them when they show up. Like, oh man, oh, it's okay. She'll get it figured out. Oh, maybe she's on the arrest page, but like she'll come around, like it's things like that like we get to have that opportunity. God has given us that opportunity to be those people on his behalf. And that has been one of the most beautiful things, being able to do that now and try and do that for other people and talk about it has been, a huge blessing, because it was a huge blessing for me in my own personal life. So
I love that. Man, I know I'm always finishing episodes with this, but man, your story is so good. It's amazing to see how, like, I mean, just like what you were saying, like God is just blessing you and blessing you. And like, it's so amazing to see. And I think our lives aren't without trial, it's just that we can face trials in like a completely different way because we have the Lord on our side. And it's so cool to see how God will take all of these things that we go through. And you can't believe that you're on the podcast. And I can't believe that this podcast that I was like, I'm going to start a podcast and I have no idea what I'm doing and I'm just going for it.
yeah,
And now here it is today. And like all the just people that love the podcast and email us, and it's so life-changing for them. And it's life-changing for us. All of us
Yeah,
who put
of
in the
course.
time for the podcast. It's like crazy how Heavenly Father has just orchestrated this and blessed our lives, and it's a miracle, and I feel so grateful that I have been so blessed by our Heavenly Father to be in this place to be able to interview you and hear your story and have this platform to hear all
Yeah.
of these beautiful stories of coming back.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, I mean, it's an honor to be able to be a part of that, this beautiful platform and try and support it in however I can. And even more so to have been able to experience these things for myself. Like, I have a testimony that it's true that there is not a soul on this planet that can't come back. There is no comeback story that is impossible.
Right.
And there are still hundreds and thousands of people out there that have these stories that are different and beautiful in their own way that we may never be able to even hear, but they exist, and that's a beautiful thing. The gratitude I feel in my heart for things like this podcast, like you talk about the angels, like my parents and their patience and just being patient, and they never lost faith. They always prayed. They kept to the faith, and all my sisters have been supportive. I've had so many people, these angels, just like you talked about, that come together and support me and have chosen not to judge me and have loved me. And that's the beauty of the gospel of Jesus Christ, right? That the second that you take that hand and you accept the help from the Savior, it's like everything is left behind. And you just get to walk with him and laugh and maybe skip a little bit and bump shoulders with the Lord, the Savior of the
Yep.
world.
Yep.
And he's just like not even worried about anything we've done or what's happened. He's just happy we're here and glad we're using his atonement so it didn't go to waste.
Yep.
And it's just beautiful to see. So
I love that. Well, Dan, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Thank you so much for reaching out and just being a good example to all of us.
well, thank you. Actually, it's remarkable and it's just a wonderful opportunity. And just thank you for all you've done to make this happen. And I'm so grateful I had the chance to be able to come share my story. So
Thank you so much, Dan.
A lot of people have asked us how they can support the podcast, and we have created a Comeback Podcast merch line on our website, www.comebackpodcast.org. All of the money made from the merch goes right back into the podcast. So if you are interested in supporting the podcast and you want to purchase some merch, we would love it. Check it out. Thank you so much for being a supporter of the Comeback Podcast and listening to our episodes. It would mean so much to us if you would like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. It helps other people be able to find us, and we want to share this message to everyone.